Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where a simple crust could turn on you, where hunger was constant, ovens were communal, and a single slice of rye might leave you dancing into madness or praying for your limbs to stop burning. Bread, your daily sustenance, your humble comfort could quietly kill you, and no one would even know why. Not the baker, not the priest, not your screaming neighbors. So, before you drift off completely, take a second to like this video and subscribe, only if this kind of sleepy video is your thing. And hey, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is on your end. Now kill the overhead lights, maybe light a candle, and let's get into some history. You step into the field at dawn. Dew clings to your ankles. It's the kind of wet that seeps into your socks and refuses to dry for the rest of the day. The wheat, if you can call this awkward, lopsided patchwork of spelt, rye, and a few stubborn oats wheat sways quietly in the breeze. You think of bread, but not with joy. Bread is currency, compliance, calories, and sometimes, casually, poison. Here in medieval Europe, bread is both sacred and suspicious. You pray for it daily. You share it with guests. You swear on it in court. And yet, you also eye it warily, because you know what happened last Lent in that village 3 miles over. The bread turned black. People twitched in the streets like dying dogs. Children saw angels. Then their hands fell off. Of course, no one says the bread did it, not officially. They say it was bad spirits, or too many sins in one place. A traveling monk called it divine judgment. A woman with 3 teeth and a suspiciously herb-laden pouch blamed unclean humors. But everyone knows it was the bread. You reach down and inspect the nearest stalk. It's rye, hardy, cheap, indifferent to climate, but always just a little too eager to rot. And it does rot. You've seen the black tips, the way the grain curls in on itself like it's recoiling from the world. The word for it won't exist for centuries. Claviceps purpurea. You won't know that name, but you'll know its taste, bitter, metallic, with a slow burn. You'll know its consequences. There's a reason peasants fear the first frost less than the late spring rain. A cold snap might ruin the crop, but a warm, wet spring, that invites something far worse, ergot, a fungal passenger that hides in your bread and sets your nerves on fire. Historians still argue whether ergotism was responsible for mass outbreaks of so-called dancing plagues. But if you've ever seen a man chew off his own tongue while trying to escape imaginary flames, the theory becomes very convincing. Still, your job is to harvest, and harvest you do, bent double under the sun, slicing the grain with a dull sickle, hoping you'll gather more wheat than mouse droppings this year. Rats are thriving. Everyone knows it. They follow the carts like shadowy pilgrims. You're not even sure what they're eating anymore. Half the grain is already moldy on the stalk. No one talks about that. Not openly. Instead, you discuss how plentiful the sheaves are, how the Virgin has blessed the field this season. You nod when someone spits over their shoulder and says it'll be a good bake this year. But you keep your eyes on the rye. You know the risk. Your hands are blistered before midday. The sun climbs, then hangs overhead like a lazy tyrant. Around you, other workers keep their heads down. No one hums. Even the birds are silent. You all remember last summer, when the bread turned to stone in your mouths and your uncle lost 2 fingers. He said it was a curse. You said nothing. The priest said it was sin, then promptly stopped eating rye. The cart arrives late, wooden wheels creaking under the weight of expectation. You toss sheaf after sheaf into its bed, and as you do, you catch sight of something too dark, too shiny, wedged between the kernels. A horn, ergot. You pluck it and flick it into the dirt like a spent match. No one sees you do it, but your heart skips. One more black horn and the miller's going to lie again. Say it's nothing. Say he sorted it. Say the oven burns all evils clean. Spoiler, it doesn't. Later, you sit by the edge of the field eating yesterday's crust, which tastes like damp cloth and faint vinegar. The tooth you lost last week aches again, probably from the chalk. You know the baker's been stretching the flour. He has to. The grain's half rotten, and no one's inspecting anymore. Quality, like your molars, is optional. By sunset, your knees feel like snapped reeds. You trudge home past the thatched cottages, each one smaller and sadder than the last. A woman leans from her doorway and offers you a smile with only gums behind it. She made the mistake of trusting a traveling baker once. Said his loaves smelled of cloves. Said they felt like heaven. She stopped talking after the second seizure. Still, everyone eats the bread, because what else is there? Stew is rare, meat is myth, and porridge tastes like despair in a bowl. But bread fills you. Bread is consistent. Bread can be carried, bartered, hidden in a pocket, soaked in wine. Bread is life, and sometimes death. You reach your door just as the sky turns iron. The wind picks up. You think of the harvest, the black horns, the ergot hiding in the grain sacks. You think of the baker's hands, always trembling slightly. And you think, maybe this year the bread won't kill anyone. Maybe this year the saints are watching. Maybe. You push open the door, and the stale smell of old flour greets you like a sermon gone sour. Sleep comes slowly. And tomorrow, the thrashing begins. You wake before the sun again, because thrashing doesn't wait for comfort, or for the kind of breakfast that would justify waking this early. A crust and water, if you're lucky. The same stale loaf you gnawed on yesterday, only now with a suspicious green patch that you eat around without mentioning it to anyone. Everyone knows. No one says. Outside, the field is still damp. Mist curls low over the ground like spilled milk. The bundles of grain lie where you stacked them, tied tight with twine that smells faintly of mildew. Today, you beat them until they surrender their seeds. Welcome to the glorious medieval art of thrashing. The tool of the hour is the flail, a length of wood attached to another length of wood by leather. It looks like a toy or a punishment, depending on your mood. You raise it, swing down, and beat the sheaves until they spill their guts. You do this for hours, not unlike a priest flagellating himself in the chapel, except the priest only does it during Lent. You do it until your spine goes numb. Grain flies, dust flies, so do insects, dirt, the occasional pebble, and whatever else has decided to nest inside the bundles. You've seen frogs jump out. Once, a mouse. Sometimes you find things that shouldn't be in there, bones, twigs, a moldy feather. It all mixes into the harvest. Some of it ends up in the flour. This is normal. You work shoulder to shoulder with others, faces gray with dust, expressions vacant from repetition. One man next to you coughs into the straw repeatedly. His name is Edric. He once claimed he could smell when the rye was turning evil. No one believed him, but he hasn't eaten his own bread in weeks. He trades it away and eats boiled turnips instead. He hasn't smiled since last Michaelmas. The sun climbs higher, and the thrashing floor turns into a choking haze of chaff. You blink constantly, tears cutting streaks through the grime on your face. You reach down to scoop a handful of freshly separated grain and inspect it. Some kernels are clean. Others are blackened, split, or soft when they shouldn't be. You crush one between your fingers. A faint, musty smell, like wet leather and old mushrooms. You pretend not to notice. Later, you and a few others gather the threshed grain into large sacks, which you'll carry, groaning, toward the winnowing barn. There, you'll throw the grain into the air, hoping the wind separates husk from seed. Sometimes it does. Sometimes the husks fall right back in, and you simply live with it. You live with a lot. Inside the barn, the air is thick with history. Literally, dust from last year's harvest and the year before that. Old spores, mice droppings, a bird skeleton in the rafters. The floor crunches with residue no one dares identify. Winnowing is a graceful process if you watch someone else do it. You toss the grain into the air and hope the lighter husk blows away. It's a moment of primitive elegance until the wind shifts and all the chaff comes right back into your eyes. Someone sneezes. You all take a half step back, not because of disease, though that's always an option, but because if he has grain rot, the spores might still be clinging to his teeth. That's a thing people say now, that it clings. No one knows if it's true, but everyone flinches. By midday, the sun has turned the barn into an oven. You drink water from a shared clay jug and wonder how many lips have touched it. The answer is all of them. You say nothing. Next comes sorting. The master of the village granary will oversee this part, pretending his lantern eyes can tell good grain from bad. He tosses handfuls across a wide plank table, squinting. He grunts approval or disappointment, like an oracle judging animal entrails. Once in a while, he pulls out a grain horn, black, curved, unmistakably fungal, and tosses it into the refuse pile with a muttered prayer. Except when he doesn't, because sometimes the bad grain gets through. Sometimes the sacks are filled in haste, and the sun is setting. and your legs no longer function properly. Sometimes there are too many sacks and too few watchful eyes. Sometimes you just don't care. One sack splits at the seam. Grain pours onto the floor like spilled gold, except this gold is riddled with blotches, dirt, and small black protrusions that twitch slightly if you watch long enough. You patch the sack. You say nothing. The grain will be milled with the rest. Outside, the wind shifts again, cooler now. You think of the mill, a place of great hope and deep disappointment. The miller has a lazy eye and an aggressive limp, and you suspect he pads the flour with crushed chalk when the grain runs low. You don't blame him. He has 6 children and a wife who mutters at night. But still chalk. You pass the sacks to a cart driver who will take them to the mill. You know some sacks will ferment before they get there. Some will get wet in the cart. Some will attract rats. And all of it will become someone's bread. As the sun sets, you sit again at the field's edge. Your hands are raw, your nails filled with grime. You find a few stray kernels in your lap and chew one. Bitter. Not always a bad sign, but rarely a good one. Tomorrow the mill will grind. Tomorrow the flour will be sifted. Tomorrow the dough will rise, or not. Tomorrow someone will eat. And tomorrow someone else might hallucinate the Virgin Mary holding a goat's skull while flames pour from their knees. You stare at the last rays of daylight and wonder if it's safe to hope this year. Probably not, but you chew anyway, because that's what people do. You stand now outside the watermill, early enough that mist still clings to the grass like regret. The building crouches low beside the stream, its wooden wheel creaking with a rhythm that sounds more labored than mechanical. You watch the water turn it slow, deliberate, tired. It hasn't been repaired since Martinmas. The miller says it's fine. The wheel says otherwise. The sacks arrive in a rattling cart. You help unload them, dragging the coarse cloth over your shoulder. Each one thumps heavily to the ground, a little puff of dust erupting from the seams. You feel the weight of 1,000 mornings just like this. It's not the monotony that gets to you, it's the suspicion. The grain has been through too much, and now it will be ground into something people trust more than their own memory. The miller greets you with a grunt. He's missing a thumb, and one of his eyes doesn't track quite right. No one talks about how he lost the thumb. Most assume it was eaten by the mill, just one of many offerings. He gestures toward the interior without words, and you follow. Inside, the smell is ancient, a bitter, yeasty mixture of damp wood, wet stone, and mildew with undertones of rat. You step over a dead pigeon in the doorway. It wasn't there yesterday. You say nothing. The mill's belly is all stone and splinters. 2 great grindstones sit atop each other, one turning slowly, chewing through the grain with a sound like distant thunder filtered through flour sacks. The wooden mechanisms creak ominously. You half expect the entire place to sigh and collapse into itself, but it won't. Mills are stubborn. You open one of the sacks, pour the grain into the hopper, and watch the mill come alive. It groans. The stones spin. The air fills with fine dust that coats your throat and eyes, making you blink like a newborn. You know better than to inhale too deeply. Flower lung, they call it. Not a medical term, but accurate enough. People cough for months after a bad season here. The grain begins to vanish between the stones. You watch it disappear, grain by grain, into flour, or something that looks like flour. The result pours down a chute into a waiting bin, a pale powder with flecks of brown, black, and mystery. You spot something that looks like it used to be a beetle leg. You don't mention it. Occasionally, the miller tests the grind. He pinches the flour between calloused fingers, rubs it, sniffs it, maybe even tastes it. He declares it acceptable. You know this means nothing. You've seen him declare moldy flour acceptable. You've seen him grind rat-bitten grain and simply shrug when questioned. Historians still argue whether medieval flour was routinely adulterated out of ignorance or necessity. The truth is both. The miller has debts. He has expectations. He has 3 sacks of inferior grain and no time to separate the good from the evil. So it all gets ground. If it clumps oddly, he adds ground bone. If it smells off, he adds a pinch of salt and calls it blessed. You turn your attention to the flour sack you filled earlier. It's lumpy. The color is slightly wrong, too gray, not quite consistent. You run your hand through it. Something squishes. Best not to know. You tie it off and drag it to the weighing bench. The scales are as crooked as the system. Weighing's a joke. The flour you brought won't be the flour you leave with. The miller takes his cut, and then some. Multure, he calls it. An ancient rite, a customary fee. You suspect it's also how he feeds his pigs. You've never seen his pigs, but you've seen the barrels outside the back door, and you can guess. He gives you your sack, lighter than it should be, smells faintly of mildew and something faintly metallic. You say thank you. What else is there to say? Outside, you watch as other villagers arrive. More sacks, more grinding, more flour destined for ovens and bellies, and possibly exorcisms. One woman drops her sack too hard. A puff of black dust escapes the seams. She laughs nervously. Just dark rye, she says. No one believes her, but no one challenges her. Bread waits for no one, not even truth. You pass the mill's discarded pile. What little gets thrown out. It's not generous. Mostly rotted husks and things even the miller wouldn't touch. The chickens peck through it. So do the dogs. You avoid looking too closely. There's a piece of something pinkish in the pile. You walk faster. The cart's waiting. You load the sacks. Your hands are coated in flour now, gritty and dry. You cough. Something in the back of your throat refuses to clear. The miller offers you a bit of damp cloth to wipe your hands. It smells like vinegar and old death. You decline. The road back is longer than you remember. Every step thuds like a warning. You think about the flour, how it came from a field that hummed with mold, through hands that didn't look, into stones that didn't care. You think of the bread it will become, the prayers that will be whispered over it, the children who will chew it without hesitation. And you think, if it's going to kill anyone, it'll do it quietly. It always does. As the cart bumps over a stone, the sack at your feet shifts slightly. A little puff of flour escapes the corner, like a ghost sighing. You don't brush it away. You just breathe it in. You return to the village, with your sack of flour slumped like a half-asleep animal across your lap. The cart rattles, the wheel squeaks, and the sun has already begun its slow descent behind the thatched rooftops. It's nearly baking day, and the oven waits. Communal, of course. You don't have one of your own. Few do. Bread, for all its personal importance, is rarely made in private. Firewood is scarce. Ovens are expensive, and fire is everyone's business. So you'll take your questionable flour to the village oven, a squat, soot-blackened structure that smokes even when it's idle and hums with gossip whenever it's not. But first, mixing. You carry the sack into your hut, which smells permanently of damp wool and cabbage. You untie the string and pour a mound of flour into a wide wooden bowl. It spreads like fog, grayish, clumpy. You pick out a pebble, then something that looks like a curled up leg. Maybe insect, maybe not. You add water, just enough to make it hold together, and begin to knead. Your hands sink into the paste with the same enthusiasm they reserve for scrubbing latrines or digging graves. The dough resists. It's sticky, reluctant, almost surly. But eventually, it forms a shape. It's not the bread of paintings. Not golden, not airy. It won't rise properly, and it certainly won't smile in a linen-lined basket. It's a dense puck of survival, and that's the best you can hope for. The yeast you use isn't from a jar. It's caught from the air, or saved from last week's lump. Sourdough sounds artisanal now. Then, it just meant you didn't die of mold the last time. You sniff it sharp, a little sweet, but mostly damp. You wonder briefly if it's still alive, or if something else has taken its place. You wrap the dough in cloth and let it sit near the hearth, close enough to stay warm, far enough not to cook. It'll rise if it feels like it. If not, well, you'll eat it anyway. Everyone does. As you wait, you glance at the other loaves in the corner. Yesterday's batch. One is split open down the side. The inside is slightly purple. You don't ask why. If it's only purple, you're probably safe. If it starts sprouting fuzz, you might scrape it off. If it smells like almonds, you burn it. That's the rule. The village oven sits at the end of the lane, near the chicken pens. By the time you arrive, others are already gathered, dough in baskets, arms crossed, mouths pursed with the stress of hoping it all works out this time. The oven keeper, a woman who's baked so long her apron is more soot than cloth, inspects each offering. She doesn't judge. She just notes. She sees the gray flecks, the cracks, the dampness that suggests too much water or not enough flour. She sees a loaf beginning to bloom green around the edge. She says nothing. You hand her your lump. She weighs it with her hands, not for fairness, but for risk. She doesn't want an explosion, or a collapse, or an infection. She shoves it into the hot mouth of the oven with a paddle that could double as a funeral plank. The baking takes hours. You sit nearby and watch the smoke curl into the sky. It smells of ash, sweat, and something faintly sweet like burnt onions and regret. Children run by, scattering chickens and clapping mud from their feet. A few villagers whisper about last week's bread, how it made old Thomas speak in rhymes for an entire day. He kept asking where his fingers went. He hadn't lost any until later, when the oven keeper finally pulls your loaf from the fire. It's blackened on one side and pale on the other, uneven, heavy, but intact. A win. She sets it down, and it thuds like a warning bell. You pick it up, feeling the weight of what might feed you or betray you. That night at your table, you slice it open. The crust cracks like old leather. The inside is dense, gray, and steaming. You take a bite, chew slowly. It tastes like wood smoke and dust, slightly sour. You wait for the telltale signs, the numbness, the tingling, the rush of strange colors behind your eyes. Nothing yet, just the quiet gnawing of hunger meeting expectation. You wrap what's left in a cloth and set it by the fire. Tomorrow it might be different. It might grow something, or someone might, because the oven never burns it all away, because the dough remembers where it came from, because sometimes the fire just makes it stronger. You wake before the rooster, not because you're eager, but because your stomach has ideas of its own. It's been growling like a cursed bell tower since the middle of the night, and the half-loaf you tucked beside the hearth has done nothing to improve your odds. You unwrap it carefully, still warmish, still heavy as sin. You sniff it. No green fuzz, no scent of almond. You take a bite. It is fine, in the way a wet rock might be fine if it kept you from fainting. It tastes like fear masked with flour. Today is breadline day. Not a queue of eager villagers holding baskets and chatting about market prices. No, it's worse than that. It's the day the manor steward comes to inspect the grain stores, measure what's left, and redistribute flour if you're lucky, or shame if you're not. He says it's about fairness. Everyone else knows it's about tax. You head toward the granary, your breath turning white in the morning chill. Others are already gathered, bent figures in wool, mothers with wide-eyed children, a few men who look like they've fought fields more than people. Everyone clutches a pouch or a bowl. No one makes eye contact. The steward arrives late, as is tradition. He wears gloves so clean they feel sarcastic. Behind him, walk two guards, one carrying a ledger, the other a sword. Neither has touched a spade in their life. You wait your turn. When it comes, you present your flower pouch, hoping it still holds the approved weight. He glances inside, pokes it with a ladle, frowns as if you've insulted his mother, and moves on. This is what passes for governance. No one gets quite what they hoped. Some get less, a few more. There are rumors that those close to the baker get better flour, that the baker waters down the worst. That one woman was seen trading buttons for better crumbs. No one asks for proof. Proof is for parchment, and you don't own any. The village baker is the next stop. You watch the transactions, flour handed over, coins clinking, small dough balls returned with nods and muttered thanks. Everyone's pretending this is normal, that the dough looks normal, that it smells right, that it doesn't twitch when you look away too quickly. You step forward, offer your ration. The baker eyes you, as if calculating your usefulness versus your weight. She accepts, presses a lump of dough into your palm. It's sticky, still warm from another hand. You wonder briefly if it remembers who held it last. Later, you watch as neighbors gather their loaves. One old man slices his too quickly, steam hisses out. But so does a smell. Not sour, not sweet, just wrong. Everyone pretends not to notice. Bread here is not a luxury or even a comfort. It's a survival puzzle. How to stretch it, how to hide it, how to eat it before it betrays you. It is currency, religion, and betrayal baked into a single disc. You pass a boy trying to trade half a crust for a candle. He's missing 2 fingers on one hand. He says it was a dog. Everyone suspects otherwise. His sister twitches in her sleep. His mother hasn't spoken in days. And yet, the bread line continues. Loaves are marked, sometimes with a notch, a twist, a seed, so families can identify their own. Or so they think. You've seen the baker switch them when no one's looking. Perhaps by accident, perhaps not. In times of famine, the bread stretches. First with more water, then with ground beans, then with crushed acorns if you can find any. If it's really bad, the baker might use sawdust. It's tasteless, yes, but it binds the dough, gives it bulk. It also gives you stomach cramps that last for days. You'd complain, but that requires energy. Occasionally, someone dies. Not dramatically, just quietly. They eat, then twitch, then fade. It's chalked up to age, or exhaustion, or sin. Never the bread, never openly. Once a man tried to hoard grain, hid it in his attic. The rats found it first. So did the smell. The village watched as his house was burned for safety. His daughter still walks with a limp. No one says why. By evening, you sit by the hearth again, staring at the loaf you carried home. It's firmer now, less forgiving. You tear a piece and chew it slowly, counting the seconds before the numbness begins. None comes. Not yet. You think about status, how bread reveals it instantly. White bread made from sifted wheat, almost never seen outside the manor, is a dream, a rumor, a ghost. You had some once, at a festival. It crumbled like soft air. You still think about it. Your bread is darker, dense, brownish gray with a crust like shale. If your fingers dent it, it dents back. Rich men eat bread that barely exists. You eat bread that refuses to forget the ground it came from. And still, it binds you to this world. You swallow. The crust scratches a little on the way down. You wait, just in case. The village oven smokes again tonight, not from use, but from memory. The fire's long since gone out, but the stones still glow faintly when you step near, like bones that once knew purpose. You don't have bread to bake this time. Not yet. You're here for gossip, and maybe to see what the baker does after dark. She's already there, crouched beside the embers, poking at the ashes like she's waiting for something to crawl out. You keep your distance. She knows you're there. Everyone always does. You settle onto a nearby log, still warm from the day's heat. The air smells of scorched grain and damp wool. You watch as she reaches into a small sack at her feet and pulls out a lump of dough. Not hers, someone else's, marked with a bit of twig. A poor family's. She weighs it in her hands, frowns, then tucks it behind the oven stone. Not hot enough to bake, just hot enough to change it. And you understand, suddenly, the oven is a place of transformation. It cooks, yes, but it also decides. It hides, it remembers. You think about what goes into that oven. Flour from fields that shouldn't be farmed, water from streams that shouldn't be drunk, dough kneaded with hands that haven't been washed in weeks, and always, always, the air, the invisible ingredient, the one no one sees, the one that brings the bread to life or to something else entirely. She glances your way and says nothing, which is fine. You're not here for conversation. You're here to see if the stories are true. That some loaves twitch, not jump, not move exactly, but twitch, like something inside wants out. You haven't seen it yourself, but you've heard enough. A child who bit into bread and found it warm long after it had cooled. A man who claimed the crust whispered to him. A monk who refused to eat any bread unless he made it himself, then died mid-prayer, face down in a cooling round that smelled faintly of sulfur. Superstition, of course, but what is? The baker pulls out the dough. It's changed now, slightly puffier, damp on one side. She presses it with 2 fingers, then sets it aside. You wonder what that does, that pressure, that touch. Bread responds to hands, doesn't it? Learns from them. You remember how your grandmother used to say that good bread comes from good thoughts, that a cursed loaf carries the imprint of its maker, that a bitter man's dough will never rise. You thought it was a metaphor. You're not so sure anymore. A shout interrupts the stillness. Down the lane, a figure stumbles toward the oven, a boy, barefoot, breathless. He holds a small loaf like it's on fire. "I didn't ask for this one," he says. His voice is panicked. "It wasn't mine." The baker doesn't move. He drops the bread at her feet. It rolls slightly, then stops. "I gave her the one with the cross mark," he says. This one had no mark. The baker leans over. She picks it up. She holds it to her nose, sniffs. Then, calmly, she turns and throws it into the dying embers. No one speaks. She doesn't explain. He doesn't ask. And you don't breathe. The bread hisses as it burns. A slow, wet sound, like something alive resisting its end. It bubbles at the edges, smells like meat. The boy runs. The baker stays. You stay. Eventually, the flames die. The air cools. She gathers her sack. As she passes you, she says, almost kindly, "Never bake with flour you didn't see ground." Then she disappears into the dark. You walk home slowly, breadless, full of unease. Your hands itch from where they held that lump earlier. Was it different? You think about the smell, the texture, the way the crust cracked like bone. You tell yourself it's imagination, that the bread can't know, that flour doesn't remember. But still, you check your own loaf when you return home. You press into it, sniff it. It smells fine, earthy, stale, innocent. And yet, when you set it down, you're sure you heard something. A faint crunch, like footsteps. Tomorrow, you'll eat it anyway, because hunger doesn't care, and neither does the oven. Your crust is darker today, not just in color, but in weight. You hold it in both hands and feel its density, as if it's absorbed the worries of the entire village overnight. It's cold, too, even after sitting near the hearth, the kind of cold that's less about temperature and more about memory. You tear off a piece and chew slowly. It's not bad, not good either, just bread. But not all bread is the same. You're reminded of that every time you pass the manor. The aroma wafting from their kitchen window is unrecognizable. Light, buttery, almost floral. Their bread isn't bread. It's alchemy. Whitened flour, sifted 7 times. Eggs, milk, even a pinch of saffron when someone's showing off. What they eat is a different food group entirely. You, meanwhile, eat slabs, discs, edible stones, and you're not alone. Bread marks class more efficiently than language. The whiter the bread, the higher the status. Nobility prefer it white, fluffy, practically dissolving in the mouth like shame. Peasants eat the dark stuff, coarse, sour, sometimes flecked with bran, so thick it resembles bark. You remember clearly the day you first saw noble bread, a festival day. You were just tall enough to peek over a table, and there it was, a soft, domed loaf that gleamed like polished ivory. You reached for it. A guard slapped your hand. You still have the scar. White bread is holy, clean, aspirational. Dark bread is honest and suspicious. The manor baker guards his secrets like treasure. He doesn't use the village mill. He has his own. Some whisper it's powered by a caged demon. More likely, it's powered by coins. He sources his wheat from drier fields, selects only the cleanest kernels, and sifts so finely that even shadows wouldn't make it through. Meanwhile, you're still trying to scrape yesterday's crust from between your molars. One of your neighbors, an old widow named Frida, decides she's had enough of coarse bread, says she's going to try baking with only the top flour this time, the white stuff that floats to the top of the grind. She saves for weeks, trades 2 hens and her winter boots, bakes it in secret, eats it with trembling hands. She dies 3 days later. Some say it was the bread. Others say it was envy. Her corpse smelled of lavender and rot. Her cat hasn't stopped screaming since. No one tries it again. You sometimes imagine what would happen if you walked into the manor kitchen and switched loaves, just for fun, just to see if a noble could stomach your bread, or if their body would reject it like a bad baptism. But you don't, because hands have been cut off for less. Status isn't just in the flavor, it's in the presentation. The trencher a hollowed loaf used as a plate is a staple of noble dining. The rich don't eat the bread itself, of course. That's for the dogs or the poor. After a feast, trenchers are gathered up and redistributed to the less fortunate. Like edible pity, you've eaten trencher scraps before, sopped with meat, grease, and wine. They taste of privilege and second chances. Once, you found a sliver of duck skin in one. You cried, quietly. There's talk, sometimes, of bread riots, of villages storming the manor and demanding grain. It happens elsewhere, but not here. Here, bread is too sacred, too feared, too personal. No one wants to be the first to spill flour for blood. Instead, you get quiet rebellions. A baker who stretches a noble's dough with rye. A miller who holds back the cleanest grain and sells it on the side. A child who swaps trenchers in the night and eats like royalty for one meal, then wakes with a rash no one can explain. Still, everyone plays their part. The poor need, the rich slice. You dream of a day when bread doesn't define you, when it doesn't reveal your station the moment you break it open, when you can share a crust without apology. But that's fantasy, like white bread. So you rise, wrap what's left of your loaf in cloth, and tuck it beneath your coat. The wind is picking up. Clouds gather on the horizon like gossip. Another storm coming. You pass the manor on your way home. You pause just for a second and catch the scent again. Light, warm, untouchable. They'll never taste your bread, and you'll never forget theirs. This morning, your bread crunches, not in the way good bread should, golden crust yielding to soft crumb, but like something meant for construction rather than consumption. You run your tongue along your teeth afterward. One of them hums in protest. There's grit in the loaf. Again, you pick through the remaining half and find the culprit. Chalk dust, or maybe powdered bone. You can't tell anymore. The baker's hand has grown desperate. You can feel it in every slice. In a good year, and those are rarer than saintly landlords, flour is still flour. Grain ground down with just enough stone to occasionally include a pebble. But lately, the flour has grown suspicious. Too white, too heavy, too textured in ways that wheat never intended. You once bit into a crust and chipped a tooth on what turned out to be crushed seashell. Decorative, possibly. Nutritional, doubtful. They say bakers stretch their flour now, not out of greed, but out of survival. A whole village depends on that daily dough, and when the grain runs thin, something must fill the space. So in go the additives. You call them miracles. The baker calls them solutions. You once saw her mix in powdered roots. Not the edible kind, just whatever she could find that was dry and vaguely flour-colored. She claimed it kept the loaves tight. You assumed she meant in shape, not in spirit. Historians still argue whether this kind of adulteration was widespread or merely seasonal. Some point to court records bakers fined for mixing in chalk, ground bones, even clay. Others say it's exaggerated, a myth of desperate cities. You'd argue otherwise, but your jaw's too tired from chewing. One man tried to make a fortune selling clean flour. He brought it from a distant town, advertised it loudly, claimed it was sifted 3 times and touched only by saints. He sold 2 sacks before the villagers noticed it glowed faintly in the dark. He left quietly that night. The sack remains. No one's dared open it. Your neighbor, Merrick, has taken a different approach. He grinds his own flour from acorns, spends hours soaking, drying, pounding them into submission. The bread he bakes smells like old leaves and desperation, but it doesn't kill him. That's the standard now. You sit on your stoop, chewing slowly, and watch as children toss crusts at a mangy dog with eyes too bright to be natural. The dog eats everything. No discrimination. No convulsions. A useful barometer, if not a trustworthy one. When the dog refuses a loaf, you know to bury it. Deep. The local priest gives sermons on gratitude, on the miracle of loaves and fishes, on the sin of waste. You once asked him if sin applied to bread that bit back. He laughed, then coughed, then took a week off. When he returned, he only drank broth. Still, the bread continues, because it has to, because nothing else fills the void quite the same. Porridge is sludge. Vegetables are seasonal. Meat is myth. But bread, bad or worse, is always there. You remember your grandfather's saying, bread builds the body. Sometimes with bones it didn't ask for. You thought it was a joke, until your younger brother pulled a tooth from his slice. Not his own. The baker doesn't apologize. She never does. Her job isn't kindness. its volume. If it bakes through, it's good enough. One woman tried baking her own last week, claimed she'd rather know what went into it. Her loaf caught fire, not in the oven, on the counter. It hissed like wet rope. She swore it spoke to her as it burned. Something about thistles and penance. The baker gave her a replacement loaf free of charge. She hasn't eaten it yet. There's a myth about a king who disguised himself as a peasant and ate village bread for a week. On the 5th day, he declared war on rye. You're not sure if it's true, but you think about him every time you choose something that crunches without reason. Tonight, you inspect your bread under candlelight. A speck of red catches your eye. Beetroot, brick dust, blood. You scrape it off and decide you're not hungry after all. You wrap what's left in cloth and place it near the door. Tomorrow, you might trade it, or feed it to the dog, or leave it on the priest's step as a test of faith. For now, it sits like a relic, heavy, silent, possibly watching. You lie down. You don't feel full, but you feel lucky. Sometimes that's enough. You're not exactly sure when bread started hallucinating for you, or rather, when you started hallucinating because of it. It's subtle at first, a flicker at the edge of vision, a whisper of heat under your skin. You dismiss it. Maybe too much smoke from the hearth. Maybe a bad night's sleep. Maybe that corner of bread you ate, the one that tasted faintly like copper and violets. You try to ignore it. Everyone does. Until the dancing starts. It begins with a girl named Lean. She's maybe 12, all elbows and suspicion. One morning, she walks straight into the village square and begins to spin. Not in joy, not in celebration, but like something inside her is winding too tight and doesn't know how to stop. She laughs as she twirls, then screams, then falls. They say it was the bread. More specifically, they say it was the rye. That's always the dangerous one. When rye gets damp, and the weather turns, and no one dries the grain properly before storing it well, that's when the devil comes in with his fungus. They don't call it that, of course. Not ergot, not claviceps. Those words haven't been born yet. What they call it is St. Anthony's fire, named for the burning, not flames, but the feeling of them simmering just beneath your skin. People scream, scratch, roll in snow. Anything to stop the heat. The girl, Lean, survives. But she won't touch bread anymore. Eats only boiled roots. Talks only in single words. She doesn't blink. Her mother's teeth fall out that same week. No one asks why. The baker swears her flour was clean. Swears she tasted it herself. But her left eye hasn't been quite right since Easter. It twitches when the wind shifts. And still, the loaves go out. The signs aren't always as dramatic as dancing children. Sometimes it's just a rash, a burning throat, a vision. You once saw a man fall to his knees in the chapel and confess to crimes he couldn't have committed. Said the Virgin told him, said she had wings and smelled like smoke. He died a day later, clutching a crust that turned green before anyone touched it. Scholars, many centuries from now, will look back on cases like this and suggest that entire communities may have been affected by contaminated bread, that what we called hysteria or witchcraft might, in fact, have been dinner. But here, in your time, there are no scholars, only bread and what it does to people. One woman, you remember, began drawing patterns in the dirt with her fingernails after a particularly suspect loaf. Circles, eyes, teeth. She said the dough told her. She said the crust whispered at night. She no longer sleeps indoors. You try not to think about your own dreams lately, about how the bread you ate last week tasted like rosemary, even though there's none in season, about how your hands tingled for hours after touching the crust, about how, for a moment, you thought your shadow was dancing without you. You've heard of villages burying bad bread, whole piles of it, burned or salted, then buried under moonlight, not for sanitation, for containment. They say the earth can hold it better than we can. You don't know if it works, but you've started marking your loaves. A simple scratch with a knife, just to make sure it doesn't come back different. Today, your neighbor brings over a loaf, says she made too much, offers it with a smile that's just a little too wide. You accept it. You stare at it. You do not eat it. Instead, you slice it open. The interior is marbled with gray and violet, like old bruises. You set it on the windowsill and wait. By morning, it has collapsed in on itself, quietly, as if ashamed. Later, someone asks if you enjoyed it. You nod, because it's safer. No one wants to be the one who doesn't eat. No one wants to be next. The bread sits in the compost now, covered in ash. You still feel its shape in your hands. You still smell it in your sleep. You've noticed something peculiar lately. The bread seems to be making people suspicious, not just unwell, not merely itchy or twitchy or softly flammable, suspicious of each other, of neighbors, of witches. It starts with the girl who claimed her sister's bread glowed under the full moon. She said it whispered her name. She said it made her bite her own tongue until it bled. And then, her eyes glowing with conviction, she said it wasn't her sister's fault. It was the woman in the woods, the one who gathers mushrooms and sings to her bread before baking. You know who she means. Everyone does. And just like that, the line is crossed. What was once quiet discomfort becomes loud accusation. They don't call it ergotism. They call it witchcraft, because it's easier that way. Easier to blame a woman with herbs than a loaf with fungus. She's dragged into the village square the next morning, still clutching a linen-wrapped bundle of dough. It's raw, unbaked, and shaking slightly, as if it knows what's about to happen. They shout. They spit. The priest recites something from a damp book. The guards search her hut and find a dried frog and 3 blackened crusts hung from the rafters. That's enough. They burn her bread first, then her. You stand at the edge of the crowd. You don't cheer. You don't stop it either, because deep down you're terrified, not of her, but of your own bread, because you've seen the same flecks of purple in your flour. You felt the same heat behind your eyes. You've heard, maybe imagined your own crust crackling in the dark like it's trying to speak. And so you do what everyone else does now. You start watching. Everyone's oven becomes a suspect. Communal baking turns quiet. People begin marking loaves more carefully, not just to claim them, but to prove that no one tampered. The cuts become more elaborate. Symbols, shapes, crosses, yes, but also circles, stars, sigils. You ask someone what hers means. She won't tell you. The baker now keeps a candle lit beside the dough at all times. Not for light, for protection. She says it helps. She also says her hair has been falling out ever since that last bad batch, and her dreams are full of doors that won't stay closed. You believe her. The priest begins blessing loaves before they enter the oven. He used to bless people, but that's not where the trouble is anymore, is it? Bread is no longer just food. It's a spiritual hazard. You hear whispers that some towns have banned rye altogether, switched entirely to barley, even though it makes flatter, sadder loaves. No one cares about flavor anymore. They care about safety, about control, about bread that doesn't stare back. And in the meantime, you develop habits. You smell each loaf before slicing it. You tap it 3 times with the knife handle. You cross yourself with floury fingers. These are small things, harmless, like a child checking the cupboard for monsters. But sometimes you still hear something, a sigh in the pantry, a shifting weight behind the sackcloth. You open the cupboard and find only bread, always only bread. But it's your bread, and that's worse, because you made it, you touched it, you ate it, and now it's watching you, just like you're watching it. The bread on your table is black, not burned, not moldy, just dark in a way that feels deliberate. You poke it with a finger, and it pushes back, faintly springy. You sniff it. It smells like nothing, which is somehow worse than smelling wrong. You baked it yourself, you think, or maybe it was given to you. It's hard to keep track now. They say it's holy. They say a black loaf, properly blessed, can drive out demons, settle arguments, even cure fevers. But only if you salt the crust, only if you score it in the shape of a cross, only if you bake it on a saint's feast day, and never, ever cut it before dawn. And so you've done all that, but still it sits there, looking back at you. Bread has always had a strange relationship with holiness, even in better times. The host, small, round, pristine, is bread of a very particular nature, unleavened. untouched by decay. It is Christ's body, they say. You've watched the priest handle it with tongs, like it might shatter or explode. And then there's your bread, leavened, imperfect, floury fingerprints still visible on the crust. Not divine, but you pray over it just the same. Because when the loaf begins to split down the center without a knife, you want God on your side. You remember the old stories. Bread that bled, loaves that wept. One tale from a town not far from here tells of a baker who sliced into his own product only to find a human tooth embedded in the middle. He screamed. No one believed him, but he never baked again. There's another story, told in whispers, of a monk who fasted too long and broke his vows for a heel of crust. When he bit into it, he found it tasted like ash and sang hymns in Latin. The next day, he shaved his head and walked into the river. Some loaves heal, some judge. Yours just sits there. You try again. Another sniff, still blank, you slice into it. The center is warm, too warm, like it's remembering the oven. The crumb is oddly pale, like it forgot to color itself. You chew a piece, slowly. It tastes fine, but you can't be sure anymore what fine means. You decide to share it with the priest, just to see. He receives it gratefully, blesses it twice, then sets it beside his stew. 2 hours later, he returns it, says it's not his type of bread, says it sings. You try not to think about what he means by that. Elsewhere, the loaves are getting weirder. A boy claims his bread made his fever vanish. A girl swears hers grew softer after a prayer. One man says he heard a voice say, "Thank you," when he sliced his, and now he keeps it in a box like a relic. He feeds it honey every morning. It hasn't molded yet. Historians of the future might call this superstition, but you're not in the future. You're here, and the only thing more terrifying than bread that poisons you is bread that wants something from you. A crumb falls from your table and rolls under the bench. You bend down to fetch it, and for a second, you feel something brush your hand. You jump. The crumb sits there innocently. You leave it. You step outside for air. The sky is gray as always, bread-colored. You wonder what the world would look like without bread. Would it be hungrier? Or just quieter? You return inside. The black loaf is gone. You find it under the table, exactly where you didn't put it. You stare. Then, with shaking hands, you wrap it in cloth, sprinkle it with salt, and bury it in the garden under the rosemary bush, just to be safe. You don't eat that night. You barely sleep, but the silence is appreciated. Famine is a cruel teacher, and bread is its favorite lesson. The rains came late this year, too little to start, then too much. The fields drowned before they could even pray for sun. Grain stores shrank, then vanished. Rats ran bold in daylight. The baker's shelves sat bare for a week. People began to trade things they once swore they'd never part with. A family gave away a spinning wheel for half a loaf. Another offered their only pair of shoes for the heel of one. Now the loaves that do appear are something else entirely. You could call them bread, but only if no one asks what's inside. You take your seat at the long communal bench as the evening meal is passed out. The village steward places a chunk in front of you. You poke it. It's light, oddly so, dry, but not brittle, hollow in sound, like a puppet pretending to be food. You break it open. Inside is a crumb that flakes more than it tears. You chew. You wish you hadn't. It tastes like bark and regret. Your teeth grind over something gritty. You spit into your sleeve. Sawdust. They've begun adding sawdust. Not because they want to, because they must. You know the process. The baker grinds old pine into powder, soaks it, strains it, then folds it into what little flour she can find. It's called filler. It has no taste, no value, no mercy, but it makes the dough bulkier, more loaf-like. You get more slices from less flour. It's simple economics. You've also tried bark, acorns, dried beans ground to dust. Once, out of sheer desperation, someone tried boiled leather. It worked. Technically, historians will debate this era as one of culinary resilience. That's generous. It's more of a quiet panic wrapped in linen. And now the bread police are back. You didn't think they'd return. But famine brings order like rot brings flies. Inspectors ride in from the city. They check the loaves, smell them, break them open with tiny silver knives. They accuse the baker of diluting with chalk. She says nothing. Her hands are covered in flour that smells faintly of clay. They don't fine her. There's nothing to take. They just note it in a book with a little frown. Someone whispers that a town to the south ran out of grain completely and started baking loaves from boiled moss. Moss. It doesn't rise. It doesn't crumble. It just sits there damp and green and waiting. People eat it anyway. What else is there? You remember the bread you had last year. Rough, yes, but real. Made from rye and a pinch of barley. Nothing extra, nothing dangerous. You'd sell a toe for that taste now, but you don't say that out loud, because you're not sure who might take you up on it. There's a kind of game developing now. Guess the ingredient. One family's loaf tasted faintly of soap, another of lye. A boy bit into something that turned out to be wool, probably from the sack, or the miller's sleeve, or a sheep. No one knows. You slice your current loaf carefully, not for portion, for hazard. It flakes apart like sand. Inside, a dark streak runs through the center. You sniff it. It's bitter, charred, possibly edible, possibly not. You eat around it. Outside, someone coughs. Not the polite kind, the kind that makes others edge away. Bread cough. It starts with a tickle, then tightens, Then the blood. They say it's from mold spores. That badly stored flour can infect your lungs. That bread, once baked, should be safe. But no one's certain. Some loaves steam when cracked open, days after cooling. That's not supposed to happen. You turn your heel into soup. It softens, but not enough. The crust resists your spoon like a man refusing confession. Tomorrow the baker will stretch the flour again. You know it. She knows it. Everyone does. Because the field is still empty. Because the rats are still faster than the traps. Because when someone offered a basket of turnips for a sack of oats, they were laughed out of the square. And because famine does something funny to memory, it makes even bad bread sound like a feast. Tonight, you scrape your bowl clean, not because you're satisfied, but because you remember what it felt like to be full once. And the bread, awful as it is, almost gets you there. Almost. You wake to the sound of shouting, sharp, deliberate, not the usual kind that gets ignored like crows or children. You pull on your boots, stiff with yesterday's damp, and follow the noise down to the square. The baker is standing there, hands behind her back, flanked by two men with halberds, and one particularly irritated-looking official with a scroll. It's tied in red ribbon, which always means something serious, or at least theatrical. You blend into the crowd forming in the square, the familiar press of sour wool and sourer breath. No one's eaten yet today. Everyone smells like anticipation and old dough. The scroll is unfurled. The words are read aloud. You already know what they say. The bread is bad. Again, the baker stands accused of cheating weights, of adulterating flour, of selling loaves that fall apart before they're blessed, of producing food that no longer qualifies as food. Some say her latest batch included crushed brick. Others claim she baked a dead mouse into a festive loaf. She doesn't respond. You've heard this before. Every village has its breaking point, and yours is long overdue. The punishment, public shaming, stocks if the mood is kind, hanging if it's not, but most often the pillory. The baker is led to the wooden frame and locked in. The crowd is handed their theater props, stale rolls, sharp crusts, broken trencher plates. You join in, but without enthusiasm. You toss a crust. It hits her apron and slides off like a forgotten prayer. The official warns her. If the bread quality doesn't improve, she won't be the only one punished. Bakers can be replaced. So can millers. So can you. Then comes the weighing. This, oddly, is more humiliating than the stocks. An official brings out the standard loaf. It's meant to weigh exactly 1 pound and be made from clean, fair flour. It gleams like a ghost. No one knows where they found such a specimen. Probably imported from a place where famine hasn't tightened its belt yet. Then your baker's loaf is placed on the scale. It tilts visibly. It is light, hollow. They prod it. It sags. Someone snorts. She is fined. 2 shillings. She has 1. The village will cover the rest, of course, through extra levies, grain withholding, fewer loaves this week. This is how the system works. The baker fails, and the breadless pay. You remember, vaguely, a thing called the assize of bread, a law from long ago. It sets the price of a loaf based on the cost of grain. It's supposed to protect you, but you've never met anyone who's seen the book, let alone read it. Historians will later marvel at the bureaucracy of medieval bread, the fixed prices, the regulated weights, the detailed punishments. They will write papers. They will cite parchments. They will miss the part where it didn't work. Because here, in your square, under your sky, a baker weeps in silence, while someone throws a crust hard enough to cut her cheek. That night, the loaves are smaller. No one complains. You bring yours home and slice it carefully. It's dry. The interior crumbles under the knife like dust off a tomb. You chew. You don't taste anything. You remember when bread tasted like something, even if that something was mold or madness. You remember when you worried it might kill you. Now you're more worried it won't feed you. 2 days later, another announcement. Flour theft. Someone's been breaking into the granary, taking handfuls, not even sacks, just enough to make a loaf, maybe 2. The steward is livid. The priest gives a sermon on temptation. The guards double their rounds. The bread gets worse. You dream of trenchers, of warm slices, of loaves with crusts that don't leave your gums raw. You wake with flour in your nose. Again. Then one morning, you pass the baker's hut and see smoke. Thick, fragrant. She's baking. Real bread. White flour. You see it dusting the air like snow. You see a loaf rising in the oven, golden and round and impossible. You knock. She answers. She doesn't explain. You don't ask. She hands you a slice. You eat. You chew. You taste. Salt, warmth, wheat. No sawdust, no chalk, no ash. Just bread. The real kind. She says, don't ask where it came from. You nod. Because you know. You finish it in silence. Then walk away, slower than usual. Somewhere behind you, someone screams. You don't turn around. The smoke still lingers the next day. It curls up from the baker's chimney like incense, fragrant and oddly out of place. You catch the scent as you pass, the unmistakable perfume of white flour kissed by heat. It smells illegal. And of course it is. She's gone now. Sometime in the night, they came for her. Not with pitchforks, with papers. Stamped, signed, and sealed by men who have never eaten anything that bled when sliced. The official said she violated weight law, that her loaves were too light, or too heavy, or just different. No one could quite agree on the crime, only that it involved flour she wasn't supposed to have. The source of it was never revealed. She wouldn't say. They took her cart, her stones, her oven paddle, left the oven itself because it's built into the ground, and bureaucracy prefers mobile justice. They say she's in the city now, in a prison designed for people who bake recklessly. A tall claim. You've never heard of such a place. You suspect she's in a pit. The bread hasn't recovered. With no baker, the village reverts to desperation. Makeshift doughs, muddy ovens, communal guesses about time and temperature. You watch as someone tries to bake on a hot rock. It goes as expected. A scorched outer shell and a gummy, sullen interior that tastes like wet socks and failed ambition. And still, people eat it. Because what else is there? A man arrives from another village, says he's a baker. He smells like spoiled cider and pride. He wears shoes. You already don't trust him. He sets up shop in the old bakery, uses the same oven. Different hands, same ghosts. His bread is pale but rubbery, rising too quickly, falling even faster. He insists he uses pure flour, but you hear him late at night, whispering into the sacks. You think one of them answered back. No one mentions the old baker. It's as if she was kneaded into the stones and forgotten. You miss her, even when her bread was dangerous. It felt alive. This new bread feels like imitation, a painting of a meal, a smile drawn on wax. One afternoon, a child finds a stone in her slice. Not a pebble, a stone. Jagged, warm, faintly pulsing, she drops it. It rolls. No one picks it up. Two men get into a fight over a loaf. Not because it was good, because it was less bad. One swings a trencher like a shield. The other uses the loaf itself as a weapon. It holds up surprisingly well. Someone jokes that bread is now a currency and a cudgel. You don't laugh. You eat in silence. The flour, when you can find it, is gray again. The good batch didn't last. No one knows where the baker got it. No one asks. Some think she made a deal with a merchant, with a demon, with the flour itself. Some say she sifted the mold out with her bare hands and whispered it into docility. Others think she simply knew what she was doing, and that was the problem. You sit by the oven one evening, watching the flames struggle to find purpose without her. You remember her saying once, "The oven knows the truth." You didn't believe her. Now you're not so sure. You try baking just once. You grind what's left of your oats and mix them with well water and hope. You need too little or too much. The dough is lumpy, rude, and mean-spirited. You bake it anyway. It emerges as a blistered slab, neither loaf nor object. You chew it. You cry. Not from taste, from memory. Later that night, you swear you hear footsteps near the oven. Not boots, bare feet, like someone familiar, moving carefully, flour rising in their wake like dust from a dream. You do not check. You let the loaf sit out, just in case. In the morning, it's gone, replaced with a small, round, golden-crusted roll, still warm. You don't eat it. Not yet. You just hold it, letting your fingers remember, letting your nose dream. You think of the baker. You think of her flour. You think of her hands. You think maybe she's not gone, not entirely, just risen. You sit by the hearth, roll in hand, and let the warmth seep through your skin like an answer you're not ready to hear. The crust gives slightly when pressed, springing back with quiet pride. It smells somehow like peace, and something else, something just a little too familiar. You don't eat it. Not yet. Instead, you set it on the table like an honored guest and watch the shadows crawl around it. Your home is quiet. The village is quieter. No one's baked anything edible in days. No one speaks of the bread anymore, not in open tones. They mutter. They whisper. They touch their loaves like relics. Every slice is a sermon. Every crumb a prayer. And then the wind changes. Literally, at first, blowing harder through the cracks in the walls, rattling the door as if someone or something has business with you. But it's more than that. It's something in the air, an expectation, a shift. The bread begins to return, not all at once, not triumphantly, but slowly, cautiously, like an animal that's forgotten whether it's safe to come out. The new baker, yes. Another one arrives without fanfare. No guards, no scrolls, just flour on his boots and eyes that don't blink enough. He sets up in the old bakery like he's always belonged there. He doesn't speak much, but his loaves are consistent, not wonderful, not terrifying, just bread. You buy one just to see. It's round, solid, slightly cracked on top. You cut it open. The interior is dense, mildly fragrant, and suspiciously bland. You eat a bite. It doesn't twitch. It doesn't hum. It doesn't whisper biblical warnings in your ear. It's fine, and you're not sure how to feel about that. You miss the danger. Not the madness, of course. Not the burning hands or the prophetic rats, but the meaning, the reverence. Bread used to speak. Now it simply feeds. People begin to act like everything's normal again. The old rituals fade. The salt on the crust, the whisper before slicing, the burying of loaves under moonlight forgotten, or worse, mocked. Children laugh about the time their grandmother cried over a crust. They've never tasted hallucination. You still mark your loaves, though. Just a small cross, hidden underneath. You still watch for the twitch. Sometimes you think you feel it. The oven smokes steadily now. The new baker works alone. He doesn't hum, doesn't pray, doesn't fear. He just bakes. And the village is grateful, or numb. It's hard to tell the difference anymore. You visit the garden behind your home. The rosemary bush still grows, wild and fragrant. You remember what's buried beneath it. That loaf, the black one, the whispering one. You wonder if it's still down there. You wonder if it bloomed. You kneel and dig. Your fingers find nothing. No cloth, no crumb, just earth. And roots, thick, twisting, oddly shaped. One feels warm to the touch. You recoil, then laugh at yourself. You're tired. You return to the table. The mysterious roll is still there, still warm. You finally take a bite. It's perfect. Soft, chewy, balanced, almost sweet. Your mouth waters and your eyes sting. You eat the rest slowly. You don't ask where it came from. You don't want to know. That night, you dream of bread rising, of ovens with open mouths, of flour that grows like fog and crusts that sing lullabies. You sleep well and wake hungry for the first time in years. That feels like hope. You've come far tonight through the fields and the mills, past the baker's trembling hands, through the whispers of witches and the hunger of a people held together by crumbs. You've seen what bread meant when it could kill you, when it needed you, when it begged for a name. You've stood in the smoke of the communal oven. You felt the silence when it cooled. You've smelled the danger hidden in rye and learned the gentle horror of a loaf that remembers its ingredients a little too well. And still you kept eating, because in the end, bread is what ties everything together, not just the body, but the story. It's the bite that reminds you you're alive. It's the crust that scratches, but still satisfies, even when it bites back. Now let it go. Let the image of a cracked loaf in a cold kitchen fade. Let the scent of baked sorrow dissolve. The stories are quieter now, the loaves calmer. You're safe here, in the space between crumb and sleep. You've survived another slice of strange, sleepy history. So lie back, let the echoes settle, and dream of bread that rises only when you ask it to.